Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be back with you. We're having a few internet problems in various parts of the world. Fee's just been traveling and just got back to Russia, and so I've had to kick the interview off with just myself, and hopefully Fee will be able to join us once she gets internet back at her place. So today, I'm very pleased to have with us Diego Sequera, a journalist, political analyst. You were the co-founder of a research group, Mission Verdad. You have extensive geopolitical experience, and you're also a poet, which I find wonderful. I think that always adds a different shape to the analysis sometimes. It's certainly something that I would love to do more of, but the world is just so crazy at the moment that it's difficult to find time to do anything that kind of brings joy in a way, because we're covering so many escalating, intense situations. You're based in Caracas, right, in Venezuela itself. What's the atmosphere like in Caracas right now? We've obviously had a lot of very hysterical propaganda coming in from the US and the West in general. Trump has been running this so-called anti-narcotics campaign and extrajudicially murdering people off the Caribbean coast rather than the actual Pacific coast, where the majority of the drugs are actually being run. So, what's the situation like now in Venezuela?
I think you maybe the noise is coming through in a very crowded area of Caracas, and basically it's and not only that. I mean, not only been I live here in Caracas, but I also traveled short last couple of weeks into well, yeah, 500 kilometers from Caracas in western Venezuela, and also to the coast here, half-hour drive. I mean, so I've been seeing the mood in other places other than Caracas, and it's business as usual. This is something that it's funny when you give an interview how some people just don't understand that this is actually what's going on. People are about their business. People are more focused on the end of years and the end of the year, making ends meet for holidays and to be able to buy, the clothing for the kids and the ingredients for the ayaca, which is the Christmas staple food here, which is a very traditional family stuff. People go to their original townships and so forth. Classic end of the year dynamic, and we're precisely at that moment, and that's what you're going to see on the streets if you walk around. The whole buildup, the whole naval buildup, it's not the first question you're going to get when you're talking to and engaging in some conversation with anyone. It will eventually, if you have enough time, it will get to that point, and what's going to happen. What do you think is the gringos are going to do? And some even call it out immediately. They say it's not going to happen. It's just, we've been here before, which is actually true. That's an important thing. I mean, Venezuelan society has gone through so many pressure moments and very overwhelmingly intense pressure moments that this is just another one. And there's no other than, of course, there's a minority who are actually expecting something. It's not what social media shows, because social media is more a thing of the Venezuelan diaspora in that sense. The most enthusiastic people supporting in some sort of crazy adventure are not in Venezuela. Of course, they are not. And and overall, that's the feeling. I mean, regardless if people want any kind of change or they don't support the Maduro government, I do support it, by the way. But people who don't support it, that doesn't mean automatically that they agree with a U.S. intervention in order to ensue regime change. And I think also most of the people see through the accusations they're leveling against not only Nicolás Maduro, but also part of the senior leadership here.
Mm.
And so it's funny how you see this massive gap between what we're actually dealing with. I have to add something. I mean, people they are sensitive about the votes, about the extrajudicial
Yeah.
killings. They are sensitive about it. They don't like it. It is a very bad sign of what could come. And so, and here, be it now or be it when during the early stages of the Guaido years, no one agrees, and this on the polls, by the way, that the U.S. have to come and directly be involved in solving, quote unquote, the Venezuelan problems. So it's a massive gap between what's actually going on here and what's being told about Venezuela on, of course, the usual suspects media, social media, which is even more crazy, and politicians in general, trying to keep up like the steam of this atmosphere, of this psychological landscape, which it doesn't amount to what actually, it's actually, at least at this point, it's December the 9th, it's happening in Venezuela.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of parallels between before what was happening in Syria and the hysteria in the social media and Western media compared to what was actually happening on the ground. Great. I think Fee's managed to join us. Has the internet come back?
Yes.
Fee, we were just talking really about the general atmosphere in Caracas at the moment and the fact that, in a sense, the people are resisting through not reacting or overreacting to, the amplification of the war drums from Hegseth, Rubio, and Trump. I don't know if you wanted to come in and say something about the ongoing situation in Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to hear more about Diego's perspective, but I just want to say, this has been an ongoing thing for decades. This is nothing new. And Marco Rubio was precisely put in this position to focus the shift on Latin America. And we're seeing it's not just Venezuela. We're seeing that Honduras is in focus, Mexico, and next year Nicaragua has elections. So I definitely want to talk more about that. But as far as Venezuela goes, I think Venezuela, a lot of people have been focused on the tangibles, which is obviously the oil and the minerals, which are absolutely important to the United States. But I think what is also happening is the United States is building a sort of block in an attempt to compete with China and an attempt to really compete in the global market. And Venezuela is essentially a part of that. And in order to take over the rest of Latin America that has unfortunately been shifting towards what, in Latin American terms, we call the far right, which is essentially backed by the establishment in the United States. That has basically meant that the entire continent of South America and Central America, as well as even Mexico, are being prepared to just being areas where all of these resources are going to be even more so extracted than what we've seen, similar to what we're seeing in Africa. And a lot of people have been talking about this multipolar shift, but what seems, what Vanessa and I have been discussing here is like a lot of this is also a competition of resources between powerful players, and Venezuela represents part of the resistance in Latin America. I mean, one of the few last bastions that we have, and the situation on the ground reflects that in and of itself, the fact that people are resisting, the fact that people are pushing back because they demand a respect for their sovereignty, despite the fact, of course, that the entire world is calling Maduro a dictator. I wouldn't say the entire world, but the entire projection of what the Western world says, right? It's just a projection. I think that is really, it's really being heard in more ways than it was before because of everything that's happened since. So yeah, I would like to hear more about, what it looks like on the ground, how people are reacting. And yeah, what I've been seeing from your reports and from Camilla's and others who have been on the ground really just represents Venezuela as a whole, not just merely for strategic purposes fighting the US, but rather in spite of that, in spite of the fact that it's not the pragmatic thing to do, there's a spirit of resistance that we're seeing. So yeah.
Yeah, I might exactly. I mean, you described it quite well. Just to add another element to that, the way that the resistance is manifested here, we can call it, one is like the unofficial defense for normalcy, which is, I think, one of the most radical things that we can ever do. And it's not different, by the way, if you see, well, Vanessa was commenting on Syria before the disaster, and also Iran in a way, before and after the 12 days of aggression. I mean, it's like the organic, coherent response. And just like Iran, I was telling Vanessa that even people that doesn't necessarily support Maduro, our president, or the government in general, they're not going to support this kind of things. You do have a fringe minority which more enthusiastic about it. It's mostly on social media. It's mostly outside of Venezuela. And but you also have the other part of this, which is also important, which is like the state duty and response to this. I mean, I'm talking about all the mobilization has been going on since September regarding the joining the militias, or the several kind of drills, not only military ones, also prevention of disasters and that kind of things, also to keep the society mobilized in that sense. So it's twofold in that sense, you know. There's more, which I won't say, it seems to be passive, this kind of daily resistance, but I think it's not. I think it's more, yeah, it's less noisy, it's less climatic, you know. It's not sexy for some people, I guess. And then you have this, which is more the state language, you know, in general terms. But regarding what you just said, Fiorella, I think we've been talking about this, all of us, for several months, regarding, yeah, there's the obvious part regarding the oil reserves and the longest coastline and the fourth oil gold reserves in the world, and gas and whatnot. Sure, that's undisputable. Not only that, especially what's going on with Guyana, which is basically now Exxon land. It would be, I mean, such a massive price just to have that long coastline that basically reaches even Brazil. If you take, well, yeah, you have French in Suriname, you have French Guyana and Suriname, but just small extent. But we're talking about a massive oil reserve, not only the heavy crude from the Orinoco Belt, which is where the vast majority of the reserves are, but also the sweet and light oil that's been taken out of the Essequibo region, which is, you know, under dispute. This is classical Brit legacy. And so just imagine that. And now we got, after last week, we know now that this, all we've been talking about, it's now official policy. It's what shows that the national security strategy. It shows, and even, well, it's such a fascinating document. I was just talking yesterday. It was like, you know, it's like a Norma Desmond moment of empire. You know, Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard. I mean, very worn down actress that's trying to do a comeback, and she needs a crappy writer to do this, and instead of achieving that comeback, basically a crime occurs. And this is precisely that literature we're seeing there. You know, it's quite amusing. And of course, you both know this is Eldridge Colby's work, and maybe some input by, of course, the Prince of Darkness, Marco Rubio, or some proxy of his, you know. And it clearly says, I mean, the now Trump corollary, as in, you know, a continuation of the Roosevelt corollary of the Monroe Doctrine, which is, it's now officially back in front and center. It basically says that the U.S. won't allow any kind of competition within its hemisphere on any key aspect of the regional dynamic. I'm paraphrasing now, of course. But he also shows something which is, I think, is important regarding this policy. Also part of the Trump corollary is they say there are two movements basically: to enlist and to expand. Enlist new allies and to expand further alliances to expand further alliances that were already established. And if you don't see Venezuela and you focus, for example, in Argentina, it's quite clear how this goes. I mean, you also, I think it was a month ago, you saw nutcase Milei was really close to having a political debacle. And after Trump basically promised billions of dollars, which are not being sent, by the way, that basically made an important shift inside the electoral landscape. And you also saw just recently what happened in Honduras. gladly enough, the Liberal Party is doing what it has to do, defending, denouncing the meddling, because it was too obvious, and at the same time, pardoning Juan Orlando Hernandez, former Honduras president, who basically pushed 500 tons of cocaine into the United States and has a 45 years prison time. It clearly shows how they are enlisting or re-enlisting and expanding, and then of course you have us on the other end of this, which of course Venezuela has, we already said about all the resource richness, but also, like you already addressed, Fiorella, which is the geopolitical aspect of this and the internal politics of this, and even the fact, I mean, this goes even to personal matters, if you see it from Rubio's view, and the fact that Venezuela hasn't in quarter of century hasn't caved in, it hasn't collapsed, it hasn't been regime changed, regardless how much harm that they have been doing to us, and especially a lot of people who basically don't deserve this, as they never do worldwide, So there, besides the resources, and also on the geopolitical aspects of this, they also want to domesticate it, re-educate, and punish the Venezuelan population. They're already doing it, and but I might add that regardless of this policy document, and also beyond the point where what we're seeing, specifically on Venezuela, they have been losing pace, I think. It's what you kind of see when things are getting complicated with, the War Secretary, South Park character, Pete Hegseth, being basically shown that he was the one who actually allowed war crimes to happen, with a double tap attack on the first attack on the fishermen or smugglers or whatever, we don't know, because they destroyed everything. The first attack in September the 3rd, there were survivors under the stress, as you all know, and they did a double tap attack. But this now shows that it reaches up to the top, including Trump himself. Even the legal authority inside the State Defense War Department, the JAG, stated this was extrajudicial executions. And even by their own legal parlance, they call it unprivileged belligerence. So there's complete erasure of identity, of dignity, of humanity. And, we know where this comes from, of course. But this, and also you have the reaction inside the Senate. So all these things, I think they made them not only lose pace, but also try to shift the narrative. Now it's different. They try to now the problem, it's not drugs necessarily, because anyway, he just pardoned a narco lord from Honduras during this process. But now the thing is this, Venezuela's electoral meddling throughout the world. And I don't know what kind of, through the Smartmatic machines, which was originally a British company that for years it hasn't been working with Venezuela. And but the funny thing is, I don't know what kind of 24D chess Maduro plays, doing all this meddling and just putting people hostile to him and to the country. So so this kind of, it's funny in a way. It's also but it's also quite dangerous, because this also shows that any crazy stuff could happen. So that's basically where we're at. That kind of like seems the mood. Other than, sorry, just to wrap up this point, other than it used to be Fridays, the day that the war was imminent. Now it's Sundays, and you have all this pundits and Pentagon insiders and whatnot saying, now this is it. Operation whatever starts now, and it's just, but it's a silence thing. Then comes Monday and nothing absolutely happens, and I hope it stays that way, at least in that front.
This reminds me when I was in Gaza in 2012 under the Zionist aggression back then. They used to send text messages to everybody's mobile saying the ground invasion is going to be 7 p.m. tonight. And in the beginning, everyone was, perturbed by this and apprehensive. And then after about the 5th day of them sending this message and nothing happened, everyone was like, yeah, whatever, and just deleted the message and forgot about it. You know, it's that kind of psychological warfare that it seems to me is ongoing at the moment against the Venezuelan people. And at the same time, I mean, I know Faye and I were talking about this. There seems to be a push both here in this region to effectively encircle and enclose the resistant state and non-state actors, right? Either through the actual building of walls strategically, for example, almost entirely enclosing Syria and preventing any land bridge access from Iran through Iraq, Syria, into Lebanon and into Palestine. In other words, the resistance states, of which there are not many left now, or the non-state actors are being completely isolated, cut off, and encircled. And at the same time, Iran is, in that sense, being isolated from the resistance actors in the region. And I'm wondering if the same policy is not being played out with Venezuela, to a degree trying to, yes, bring in the narratives to criminalize Venezuela, to create this psychological warfare, but also ultimately with what's going on, as you said, in Argentina. Even we can talk about the potential of Brazil and Colombia also being destabilized to prevent them coming to any assistance for Venezuela. But also, Fee, you were talking about the recent kind of fraudulent elections in Honduras. And I'm wondering whether that same policy is not to some degree now being used against Venezuela to try and isolate Venezuela.
Not relying on any, at least at this moment, that I can't remember, on any official document, policy, or think piece for that matter. But it really, I mean, we're talking about maximalist worldviews, and we're talking also about a rationale that basically, it's a hammer that every problem is a nail. So and also, we can go a decade ago and see how close the procedures and the tactics and the resources and the whole, the whole hybrid warfare thing, unconventional warfare plus color revolutions equals hybrid warfare, basically, the Coripco formula, if you may. And we actually learned, so I'm going, 12 years ago. I mean, actually when Misión Verdad started, when El Comandante died, everything shifted so quickly, as in the way we understood ourselves, but also the way that actually empire was updating itself regarding what to do with us. So we actually had to take like 2 steps back and start seeing everything like anew, and ask for the basic dumb questions in order to be able to actually see where we actually going, because we were too used to, first we were used to have like the best communicator in the Venezuelan recent history, and then the other one is a very highly ideological, automatic, auto-conclusive environment to interpret, to understand what was going on. And in order to understand this, we had to see what was going on in Syria. We had to see what people were saying about what kind of things were happening in Syria, in Lebanon, earlier in Iran, and then later on was proven one more time. And that's the way we understood, basically, that we were facing the same kind of methods, the same kind of tactics and strategies and views regarding all of us. Because this goes, I mean, Orientalism, it's, of course, the landmark book by Said, but the basic principle of it, we are all basically seen through the same kind of lens. We are all subordinate, irrational, unable to govern ourselves or rule and tell our own history with our own words. So it's easily to see that it's going to replicate itself. Actually, this also helped to draw us near, Venezuela and Iran, Venezuela, Russia, Venezuela, China, Venezuela, Lebanon itself, to some degree, also because we have a huge Lebanese community here. But this kind of things draw us closer, and they were the one that proved to us and showed us that it's the same battlefield. You know, it's the same contact line. It's just different geography. It's just a non-linear one. And so it's the same problems. And this, of course, and they also try to, I mean, just for example, you have Maria Elvira Salazar, a congresswoman for Florida, which is part of the Florida, the Cuban crazies. That's Trump's words. And boy, he's right. I mean, this woman was saying, among other things, that Venezuela was supplying uranium to Hamas. You know, so they actually do it. I mean, and also there's another thing, but Venezuela doesn't recognize the Israeli government since 2009. So it's funny to see all people, you know, all flashy about like Chile did it in Colombia. Yeah, nice, but we have already 12 years of this with a heavy toll. I know for an insider comments, people saying from other countries, not the ones that we are used to think of, saying, look, if you solve your problems with Tel Aviv, things will go easier. And of course, that's not to debate. Palestine here, it's also a national cause. And this is also part of the problem, of course. But overall, what I'm trying to say here, it's basically, yes, I mean, it is the same thing. And when you go to these places, like Iran, I went twice this year, it's so easy to relate to each and every aspect of this, regardless of how different, culturally speaking, we might be. But at the same time, on daily life, it's the same. I mean, the kind of problems common people have, the root causes of these problems are basically the same. I mean, sanctions also united us all, you know, and the response from the population and also the carelessness about threats. So, yeah, I mean, so when they say, yeah, the proximity between Venezuela and Iran is a problem, yes, it's a problem for Marco Rubio, of course. It's not, but it's not their problem because it's a sovereign decision. We do that. And also, back in the long run, this was also U.S. Fault. They were the one who embargoed Venezuela. Back in the day, I'm talking about military spare parts in F-16s in 2006. That's why Comandante Chavez decided to buy Russian military hardware instead. Because if you're not going to play ball as a rational partner, what's the point? And not only that, I mean, I'm just being, you know, I'm being superficial about that kind of engagement between Venezuela and the U.S. It's far more complex than that. So yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, with what you say. I mean, we're all at the same side, part of the same weird hybrid, non-linear contact line, and things are quite interconnected. Just to finish one, this is another of my obsessions, and I've been given like 3 interviews daily, depending to friends and foes and anyone else. But this is the world after Gaza also.
Yeah.
You have enough evidence of this, of what all the extrajudicial, all the 80 people, which are Venezuelans, which are Colombians, are Trinidadians, and they don't say it, but they're also Mexicans. The way they approach the value of those lives and how little they actually mean, legally speaking, not only, you know, morally, spiritually, just legally speaking, it proves that. And then the other part of it, the silence of the other usual suspects in not condemning this kind of situations, this kind of acts and operations that we're going through. So it also shows that. And one third point, which I think is as sensitive of the previous one, is this new war package, which is, you know, high-tech AI, privatized service run by the tech bros. The whole thing about the, you know, Hex a couple of weeks ago, I think, a bit more, like a month, I think. I just lost track of time now, you know. He officially launched Operation Southern Spear.
Yeah.
There was a very corny name, of course.
As usual.
But this, if you check out the doc, it's from January the 28th. So it's not actually new. But the important thing about that document and what it says is how much they're giving to AI automatized tools to screen and surveil El Caribe. And this is also part of that Gaza expansion into the rest of the world, you know? And there are other aspects, I think, but these 3 are like the most descriptive one of where we at right now and how that rationale, that logic, it's going to be ensued everywhere.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, going off of that specifically, what's interesting is how you've connected all these points because it really is all connected. For example, there are Venezuelans in the United States who have that I've known that have opposed Maduro for so long, but given Donald Trump's recent actions against all immigrants, they're like they've changed their tune. They've kind of acknowledged the reality, right, of the situation, and they're like, wait a minute, we thought he wasn't going to go after us. We thought that because we had businesses and money and all of this, and it's funny because this particular family that I know are Venezuelan Lebanese, and they were supportive of Trump until Trump started going after all Latinos, and they started living in fear, and that reality came in upon them, right? And these are people I know from Florida, of course. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think what Donald Trump is doing, what the Trump administration, right, whether you call it the deep state or the intelligence apparatus, what they're trying to do is use everything that you just said, the tech surveillance, all of that, all of that's being used on immigrants in order to quote unquote control the border. All of that is now going to be used on US citizens. It is definitely going to be experimented on Palestinians and people in Gaza if Jared Kushner and Donald Trump get their way and they turn Gaza into essentially just basically another Tel Aviv. If you've ever been to Tel Aviv, it's just luxurious properties and hotels, overly expensive, and it's just going to be beachfront property. And that's their goal. But their goal is to control the population by spying on them through AI and surveillance and all of that. And the thing is that Americans are starting to realize in the United States, these Americans are starting to realize that all of that is being used on them. The other day, we had a US citizen be pulled out of her car and completely taken by ICE detainees until she managed to finally prove to them after she was beaten that she was a US citizen. And this is happening now several times to several US citizens. So now it's like, okay, well, they're after everybody. And all of the things that we have exported, that the US government has exported, all of the violence, all of the bombs, all of these things are going to come back and into, the United States. And that's why for me, I guess, Diego, my question for you is how realistic is it that the United States, given its problems domestically, given its I guess overexpansion, it's got the Ukraine war that Trump is trying to quote unquote end, it's got the attacks that it's unleashed with Israel on Lebanon, on not just obviously Palestinians, but also it's got its eyes on Iran, it's got its eyes on China, it's overextended. How do you see the United States truly actually going after Venezuela? Do you see it as more of a combat? They're going to actually go in there, G.I. Joe, and do some sort of fighting with Venezuela? Or do you see it more of like this is just chest puffing? Because every day we're seeing, as you mentioned earlier, not like things are remaining calm. They're saying that they're stopping all the flights. They're closing Venezuelan airspace as if they have the authority to do it, and then people are defying them, and Venezuelan flights are happening some way or somehow. And so for me, it's kind of like, what exactly is the truth there? Are we actually going to see these attempts come in that magnanimous way, that huge, big outright way, or are we going to more so see further attempts to destabilize Venezuela in a more subversive way where they try to turn people in the military, turn people in Maduro circles?
Targets, yes. I mean, well, you're so connected one from the starting point of your comment up to the question, because and also it shows the cruelty of it all, right? As in how Venezuelans, in this case, because we're talking about them, but it's not exclusively about them, us, but talking about that, if you just go even a couple of years before Trump arrived into office and the draconian new policy regarding migration, you had the other extreme, and it was as useful and as weaponized as the current policy regarding migration. The whole TPS thing was such a descriptive social engineering procedure that included, one more time, to use Venezuelan as basic assets to set up a narrative and also to use it as some sort of asymmetrical demographic pressure point, you know? And but at the core of this is we don't give an absolute crap about you. We never did, regardless of whom's on office, you know? And for all my fellow paisanos and paisanas to learn it the hard way, I mean, it's tragic. And you have to add something else. Who is actually taking them out from Secot, picking them up, you know, Secot, the maximum prison in El Salvador, from Guantanamo, or directly in the United States, is the Venezuelan government, is the Chavista government that's actually making it. Even now, those flights are still going, picking up deported migrants and bring them home by this government that they used to hate. So it's funny how, this combobulating feeling they might have and all those mixed feelings, because that's actually going on other key elements of Venezuelan society at this point. I'm not going to go into that because it would be a massive detour, and so this, if you check most of the comments, most of the think tank pieces that have been coming out, especially CSIS, among others, I think that was a very good example from 2 weeks ago, and others, they all rely heavily on what goes inside Venezuela. So they want to use us also one more time to be the ones doing the dirty work, the dirty business here. They all recommend that something new, I mean, regime change, social breaking point, social breakdown, an uprising against Maduro, or even civil war scenarios, in order to make this, what's going outside the buildup, make more sense and less and cheaper, you know, in military costs, human costs, PR costs. I mean, so the same rationale that uses migrants the way they did and then punish them, and the way they killed the fishermen or the smugglers or whatever, the people from the sea that are just with their small boats unable to reach U.S. shores and everything else, proves that they really need us to do their bit. And not only that, that's also Maria Corina Machado's rationale, you know, our current Nobel Prize laureate. That's also what she wants to do. And that's why she doesn't have that support she thinks she has, and she sells to the outside that she has. Because everyone sees through that. You have all this uppity, high-class legacy Venezuelans from Caracas telling you to go do their fight. And they're not going to do that. I mean, this is class awareness also, in a strict sense. So this brings us, yes, to what the possible scenarios might be up to this point. And it's important what you said, because we have to also keep in mind, as usual, that this is a Rubio thing more than a Trump thing, the way it's been done. And Rubio is national security advisor. He has all the Title 50 resources to go covert as much as he wants. And he's also, of course, State Department Secretary of State. And he also has all the slush fund money from the, is it dead, USAID. So he has huge amounts of cash to go covert and to try to do things. And to prove it, you don't need Trump saying I authorized covert operations inside Venezuela, because that was basically a PR stunt. I mean, they've been doing it already here and around the world. But there was how many things? I mean, since last year, there have been, at least that I know, and that they are officially recognized as open information, at least 20 terrorist plots, including, you know, Albanian clans based in Ecuador, mercenaries. Even in one case, there was this U.S. Chicano Green Beret, active Green Beret in one of these plots. And also this guy, this regime change professional, Matthew Van Dyke, was actually arrested here for a while. I don't know where he's at right now. But just to show you how all this outsourced war complex is also operating some way or another. So this foiled terrorist plots. And then you got another foiled attempt to do a false flag attack on the U.S. Embassy here, which is massive, by the way. And it was also foiled, and all the receipts were sent to the United States without any response, of course. And they tried even to reach the president's personal pilot, a general, an Air Force general, in order to, divert the flight where he was supposed to be flying and get into U.S. jurisdiction so he can get a green card. So what I'm trying to say here is that they still try to find the breaking point by themselves, not only because people are not doing anything about it, but within that, of course, the top prize is the army. How to fracture it, how to create some really dangerous or aggressive internal divisions in order to, well, one more time, to us do their bit. So if this doesn't work, and based on what we got on the Caribbean, just a few nautical miles from Venezuelan territorial waters, you don't see enough of a number of troops to invade. All these think tank experts and so forth always talk about 100,000 to 150,000 to make it make sense. Of course, this also could be useful in some sort of, the beachhead operation and trying to control some enclaves or something, which is nuts. And I don't think militarily it's viable. Actually, mostly they recommend long-range attacks. There's even a think piece by it's called Miami Strategic Intelligence Institute. Of course, if you know, it's a spook outfit. It's a Marco Rubio outfit. And the guy in front of it, Jesus Romero, he has worked with the CIA, with DIA, but Booth Allen Hamilton as well. So it's a, peak spook, wherever you look at. And this is a July 27th piece. It says basically that airstrikes would be successful on a general uprising and will succeed throughout the country but Caracas. So it's always there. They're always saying what they want. And this is like that Libyan scenario. It's like the most idealized one, as in something happening and then some air support in order to, to tip the balance. Libya style, of course, but we're not Libyan in that sense either. And Venezuela is far more complex in geographically speaking and otherwise. And the other possibilities, of course, which are clearly obvious, are, the risk of a decapitation attempt, like in Tehran, in Iran in general, and just back in June, or early November 2024 with Hezbollah. I actually had to engage with one of those debates in France, von Carter, with another spook saying that was going to be just surgical and clean operation. It's going to work and it will change everything. But all these decapitation attempts hasn't worked. Neither. Okay, they got Sayed Hassan, of course, in the top echelon of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah's still there. And same with the Iranian government. So what they're talking about, actually. But that's a probable scenario. But and of course, infiltration, that kind of sabotage operation, which are already going, including sabotage to the oil industry and maybe the financial system, cyber attack, that kind of things. But an invasion, still at this point, it's really hard to see.
Mm-hmm. I also just want to mention that Maduro extricated many of the Venezuelan Druze in Syria, in Ceuta, who were basically being targeted, of course, by Jolani's Takfiri regime, and were being slaughtered. And it was Venezuela. Many people don't understand the dedication of Maduro and his government and his diplomatic corps to the Venezuelan people globally. Those that are living external to Venezuela, like, for example, the migrants, the deportees in the US that are being kept in Guantanamo-style prisons like Trump's, Crocodile Alcatraz, which is just appalling. or being deported to El Salvador, where they are effectively being held in abysmal conditions. And Venezuela was responsible for bringing out those evacuees from inside Syria. And I was here when they exited. I know how big of a job this was to liaise really with the Zionists, with the Takfiris, to ensure their safe passage, while in fact the Druze were being targeted and massacred, of course, as a pretext for Israel to be able to come in and make southern Syria a kind of Zionist protectorate, if that word even has any meaning in relation to Zionism. But you mentioned, or I think we've all kind of touched on Russia and China. There's been a lot of hype about Russia's coming to the rescue of Venezuela. And I know when I spoke to the ambassador here in Lebanon fairly recently, he said to me, look, Vanessa, if we have arms from Russia, Venezuela is buying them. This isn't some kind of savior riding in to rescue Venezuela. Venezuela is also very important strategically, geostrategically, from a resource perspective to both Russia and China. Venezuela is not yet assimilated into BRICS, and we've been talking a lot about the fact that China and Russia abstained on the UN Security Council resolution 2803. And there's been a lot of kind of very heated argument on social media. We have taken a strong position that this was not only morally, but actually also under international law, under any kind of humanitarian convention and law, this was not a good step by Russia and China, because it effectively gave a green light to the Trump final solution for Palestine, not only for Gaza, but also for the occupied territories, to go ahead. And of course it is, under the auspices of a so-called peace plan, what is actually happening, the genocide is continuing, but a lower intensity. So in other words, to a large degree, support for Palestine has been throttled back, particularly in the West, because they're living under the illusion that there is some kind of negotiation process ongoing. Whereas, of course, we know what the reality is. Israel has taken more territory inside Gaza. It's increasing and expanding the settlement programs in the West Bank. It's increasing its territorial grab in Syria, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I just wanted to get some understanding from you as to the relationship with Russia and China, how they are perceived in Venezuela, and your perspective on why Russia and China at this stage abstained on the vote for UN Resolution 2803.
Yeah, just before we get into it, I remember you talking about the Druze in Syria. They call it Venezuela, actually. It's Venezuela because of that. I mean, so many Druze population from. And I wasn't aware of that operation. So that tells you how sensitive that was.
Yeah.
And also, it also tells you about the substance. We do believe in sovereignty and solidarity in a way that's actually meaningful, right? I mean, we actually do believe that. I mean, and that's regardless of what the world says or does about it. Now, regarding U.S., and I might add, I have to add, I mean, the three big Eurasian players here, like Russia, China, and Iran, because Iran also has a significant engagement here, and significant involvement, and not the way that the neocons dream of, but they are, of course. I mean, that's a normal between normal countries. I mean, we know which ones they're not the normal. We don't even know if that's a country actually. Talking about the U.S. But the thing is that, no one expects here some sort of heroical, superhero kind of intervention from it. Makes no sense. And actually, why would they support us if we're not able to defend ourselves? That's one of the fundamental premises. In that sense, we rely mostly on Venezuela. And that's also been the point. We have, at some point in time, we were basically alone talking about the region. I mean, even the Latin American left in general, they abandoned us. That's why I'm still mad and pissed about Latin American politics in general as well. I'm trying to make a comeback because it's necessary, but I was fed up because of how, I mean, how easygoing it was during the Chavez years and doing the barrel with an unsanctioned country with a lot of money and the best salaries in the Western Hemisphere and so on. And then when things got hard, they didn't abandon ship. They started to talk against us. So I felt so betrayed in that sense. That didn't happen, by the way, with the Chinese, with the Iranians, and the Russians. And yes, I mean, the three of them have a significant level of engagement, and we have strategic agreements with the three of them, at a very comprehensive level. I mean, the kind of agreement that we have with Russia, it's not, I mean, not many countries do have that. And same with Iran. So, and they all involve like a full spectrum approach, which includes, of course, energy, it includes health, it includes industrial input, exports, and yes, technical military cooperation, to use the Russian vernacular, right? And we have Russian hardware, and our president has boasted about precisely the most asymmetrically successful or operational for the kind of defense doctrine that Venezuela has. So what else can they do other than what they're doing also, I mean, on a state level, on each and every multilateral diplomatic stage? They are doing it. I mean, just in the outcome a couple of days ago, they advised the U.S. not to slid into conflict with Venezuela. Russia stands shoulder to shoulder with Venezuela. I mean, these are not, I don't think they're boilerplate words. I mean, I think they mean it. And they mean how sensitive this is for the three big multipolar players. The three of them are a different kind of engagement. I mean, China is an economic energy kind of cooperation, and they are also quite candid and frank about what they think of the situation regarding Venezuela. They're not ambiguous about it. Russia has a more thorough involvement, and also it's quite, and the political engagement, I think, is far more intense. But I think it also has to do with Russian style and diplomacy and how comprehensive it can be. And with Iran, it's even more. I mean, it has I think it has, let's call it an ideological component. I think it's more a spiritual one, but ideological, it's easier to make people understand. And how they also have shared know-how on how to circumvent sanctions, and how the worst moment regarding fuel here in Venezuela, they were the ones who actually broke the siege and brought 3 tankers with fuel to Venezuela back in 2021. Now I don't remember exactly the exact date, but I mean, so they've already done very important things. What else could we ask for? And also you have how impractical and how it will work for U.S. benefit, a military involvement of sorts of any of these state actors. I'm not saying that maybe, I don't know, on a volunteer basis, you could have, I don't know, some Russians and some Latin Americans also, and maybe Iranians joining the fight if it gets to that point. But it's not, it won't be an official state effort. So, and yes, and part of the explanation of why Venezuela, besides what we already said, is this: it's the most dynamic and daring policy in the region. I mean, we're not afraid of a lot of things, just like Colombia and Brazil are, for example, and we are pretty dynamic in that sense regarding our multipolar engagement, which I do still believe it's a given. The problem is, well, Brazilian libtardness, but we can delve into that in a second, of course. So, and yeah, I feel on an emotional and otherwise level, and the individual level, I feel the same about what happened with the Security Council. I do think I understand the calculations that made Russia and China abstain, and also not to allow, the Arab states to like carry less weight than they should, although they're all one way or another full, Abraham Accords if we go further, or even more dark. Just think about the UAE and the RSF relationship in Sudan, just to make the point. I'm not going to get that much into that unless you want to, but so yeah, and actually I was part of a series of conference from the Eastern Studies Institution from Moscow a couple of months ago, and that's what I addressed. Basically, what we're saying about how they're gasifying the Caribbean, the risk of it. Of course, it's not you can't compare it, but the rationale is there, like we said. But also, what sense would multipolarity have if you're not able to stop genocide? You stop the civilizational paradigm and the political economic paradigm of the West.
Yeah.
So, but I understand. I don't like it. But I do understand that this is more a midterm kind of calculation, I think. And because there are many ways that the US also try to make Russia and China to overextend politically or otherwise. The Russian case is quite obvious. So I don't know in which point all this game theory would end up, with Russia or China with much more on their plate that they needed at that current moment. But yeah, I'm not happy about it, and it shows the limits also. Shows what we actually are and what also needs to be done, and also proves to any other Cold Warrior, sleepless Cold Warrior, how this is not precisely, BRICS is not an anti-Western juggernaut. It's about something else, but it's not confrontational. That's one thing for sure.
Fee?
Yeah. Well, BRICS is just ultimately an economic bloc that is there to act as just a counterweight to the G7, but not necessarily an adversary, right? And it doesn't mean equity. And a lot of people placed upon BRICS that it would mean equity, that it would mean people from the so-called global South would then be able to attain some sort of equity. And it's not. It's based on very, very much like the UN type of partnerships, of diplomacy and all of that. And, I think the reason why I was so critical about Russia and China abstaining rather than using their veto was because for me, that's like the minimal thing that could have happened. And knowing, of course, that the Arab Gulf states are entirely Zionist, Western controlled. So for me, using that excuse of giving them, allowing them to have importance, it's like, well, they are the ones that are actually going to be used to isolate Iran, to attack the resistance because they're captured. So for me, it's like, I understand like the perception, I understand the mechanisms behind it, but it's, I do see, considering both Russia and China have relations with Israel, that we're kind of gearing towards more of an economic shift where there's just powerful players and they're going to engage diplomatically. And that's kind of like how Russia and China do diplomacy. They don't interfere. They don't, well, they do sometimes. There are exceptions that we've talked about, but they vocally say they don't interfere. They don't try to impose their political will on other sovereign nations. This is how they look at things. They follow the UN Charter. And so I understand how that's been put out, but I still, I not only don't like it, I think it was a huge mistake for the credibility, I think, of what people thought would mean an anti-imperialist perspective that I don't think actually applies, especially to Russia. And so that's just one aspect of that. But since we're talking about allyships, that's more of like an allyship at an international level. What the relations that Venezuela has with both China and Russia are important, which is why I think that they're valued more in terms of players in the region than others would be, say Syria, even at the moment that the collapse happened. Now, when we look at Venezuela's closest neighbors, we see Colombia. Now, recently, the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, gave a speech where he talked about reestablishing the Gran Colombia, from this state of this. It wouldn't be an empire; it would just be like a conglomerate of Latin American states, right? From Simón Bolivar, the Bolivarian dream, so to speak, of so long ago. And he talked about this in a speech, and he gave a speech where he was talking about Colombians trying to defend their sovereignty, trying to basically respect themselves because they were being disrespected and humiliated and killed by the United States and by, these major players. And so that speech seemed quite compelling and quite, I would say, radical for somebody like Petro, who, yes, in his youth was a militant, but he climbed up the political ladder by going towards the center more. And I was in Colombia during the Colombian elections when people were happy to elect him. And I sat with the Communist Party leadership who was explaining why they chose to support Petro, despite the fact that they really didn't, agree with him politically. And he was far, to the center. It was because they wanted to stop the killings. They wanted to stop the narco dictatorship that basically laid before them. They wanted to stop the murder and the violence in the streets and seeing their people die. And so they thought this was, the way to do it. So Petro won because of the conglomeration of multiple facets of ideologies coming together. And he has been a lot more, I would say, radical than some would expect, but he always totters, right? Then the next day or 2 days after, he went and basically made another statement on X where he said that, Maduro should basically negotiate with the United States. Exactly. So, which I thought was like not just ridiculous, but just disrespectful and completely like it's not making sense. He's not being quite consistent. Yeah. So just basically on that, my question to you is, how do you see Gustavo Petro and Colombia in general as related to Venezuela? Do you see them as an ally? Because from my perspective, I don't see them as reliable, but I also see that the communication has been there much more than it was before, obviously, with the Uribistas. And so I see that as a positive step. And that same thing applies to Lula da Silva, who is also that type of progressive social democrat, but is obviously nowhere near Daniel Ortega, nowhere near, Cuba, nowhere near Venezuela, right? So how do you see that relationship right now?
Well, even with all its strange, statements at some moments, and also he's a very, the whole environmentalist speech of Petro's discourse is also so obnoxious and unrealistic that it's annoying. But for me, and mind you that ideologically, I first of all, I'm a Bolivarian and then the rest. Petro has been a pleasant surprise, actually, regardless of very significant and visible and even stupid contradictions.
Yeah.
You'd rather have that, and this is not what I'm going to stop. But it's even this with its contradictory terms and maybe some ideological drifting and whatnot. It's far more better and rational and normal regarding our relationship with Colombia, especially coming from more than a decade. 15, 20 years of open hostility, sabotage, hardcore U.S. realignment, and oligarchical approach to government, and basically the different stages of their own population extermination that Colombia has gone through. The Colombian tragedy, it's also ours in many ways. All all the Colombians that came to Venezuela. Venezuela was a receptor country in migration terms until 2017, 2018. And we all, at some point in our family, have at least one Colombian relative. I do have, for example, it's not a blood relative, but it's part of the family. He was married to someone, his family. There's always one. I mean, there's no big, we are not that different, Maybe we're cooler because we're Venezuelans, but that's just me being a dumbass, I mean, they're not big difference. And if you go there, you're going to see. You haven't been to Venezuela, right, Fiorella?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but don't you realize how it's just, you feel the accident that something, when did this birds was split apart, and two wings went different ways. I mean,
100%.
because it's like that. And so it's also even more of a nice thing also at this moment, Petro being the one, not us, not Nicolas, the one who's also calling for the Bolivarian roots in order to face the threats that we're going through. I mean, I think that's wonderful, and I think it's necessary. And we have to address that because that dream is actually the actual idea from the start of independence back in the 19th century of what Latin America should be. And instead of that, we have a balkanized continent, instead of a continental nation, because all of them at the starting points of history, Bolívar, Belgrano, Miranda, anyone you name, Artigas, Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia, throughout the continent, Morel, they didn't see it as different, like very, well delimited difference. It was the same thing. Not only on language and otherwise. So in that project, that's actually what faces the Monroe Doctrine. That's the other alternative. That's the alternative that Comandante Chavez brought back into life. And so seeing among anyone else, the Colombians, Petro himself saying this, it's good. I think it's fundamental, and it's also, and you can also see what he's doing regarding Gaza, what he has done, what he has said. Maybe not done, but said. I think it's as important as not even regardless of its impact, just to break the group thinking, the consensus, and the way he has done that. It's important. And another extra, which I think I should be thankful to Pedro, is the bluntness in which he addresses the drug dealing business and where does it actually operate. And the key players now who are laundering the money and meeting with impunity, all of them, and planning what to do with the drugs, and all these cartels, this G9 of crime. By the way, they meet in Dubai, according to Petro. So that part, I think it's wonderful. But at the same time, Petro has very strong limitations. Well, fun fact, Petro comes from El M19. El M19 doesn't stem from the Communist Party, it comes from ANAPO. So it's more like a radical nationalist approach, and it also very complicated history. I mean, many of those guys ended up being paramilitary operatives also. And many went mainstream politics, and others went to other guerrilla formations back in the day. And Petro chose to go the political path, which is the right thing to do. And he, as a senator, he was a very important guy also. But he has his limitations. All the environmentalist thing, his own Vice President Francia Marquez, it's a Soros grantee. Murillo, the previous foreign minister as well, who was actually the driving force in not recognizing the Venezuelan electoral results from last year. It was it was driven especially by Murillo, who I think now it's the U.S., it's a Colombian ambassador at the U.S. So, I mean, some things that they don't need much details to understand where they come from, right? And also the thing that to share government between Nicolás Maduro and María Corina Machado. I mean, por Dios, it's like, okay, now do that yourself, because you have been under the same kind of threats from even more dangerous and destructive forces there. Why don't you go offer a Vicky Davila to share government with you? Under what criteria? Under what legal criteria? And obeying to whom? So I think those are dumb comments, but I can live with them as long as this other part is there. And also, the candidate for the Pacto Histórico coalition is Ivan Cepeda. And that's a different thing. This is a way more sober guy and also far more dangerous for the Colombian establishment than Petro is. So I hope he actually gets into office because I think it's going to be even better in the sense of sovereignty, independence, cooperation, and so forth. I hope he does, and impunity inside Colombia. But it's a bigger danger for the for the powers that be, for the Uribismo, for Álvaro Uribe in particular. So we'll see. And yeah,
That's next year, right?
Sorry?
Next year, right? Petro's out, I think.
Yeah,
The end.
Sorry? I missed
Petro
that.
Petro is out. He can't run for office, right? After
I
the
think he
following year.
could. I think he could for a second term, but he doesn't want to.
No.
Okay.
It's okay. I mean, and I think it might be correct also because if he started doing that, that would be like the main,
Yeah.
line of
Reason.
confrontation. The main target would be his own, his his Chavista will to remain in power and whatnot. So it's okay. I think they're smart people also. Petro is very smart. Maybe you have these clumsy moments and so on. And then also they've been through really tough pressure as well. And this existential moment, I think it helps us to reach this point. And also, Petro's at the end stage of his government. So he's also looser than he was before. I mean, he has a lot to do some rally outside the UN and lose his US visa, by the way, in the process. So, I mean, he's been able to do that kind of things. And then you got Brazil, which I think is a different tune. And the main problem there, I mean, also under extreme pressure, weaker structures, less radical, a very more corrupt system by design, politically speaking. I mean, the kind of alliances all Brazilian federal politicians need to reach in order to make the system viable, it's already crooked by design. So these alliances also undermine any further possibility. And then you also have the woke wing of the Workers' Party in Brazil, which also are not helpful at all. And also there's one thing. I mean, Lula 3 is not Lula 1 or Lula 2.
No.
I mean, his main power structure was basically destroyed after Lava Jato, after the Odebrecht scandal, after all of that. When he got out, Marcelo Odebrecht, Joao Santana, and José Dirceu, he was basically alone. Because these were the three main operatives, one on the financial one, the other one on the PR level, and the other one as the leading political operative. And the three of them were targeted and basically destroyed and harmed, right? So it's a weaker Lula. That's what I'm trying to say at first. And then, yeah, he has his own limitations, and he has been quite disingenuous about his relationship with Venezuela. And he has also Celso Amorim, his top advisor for everything. He was an ex-foreign minister and ex-defense minister. And this is the guy actually that states that they're going to use BRICS as an inspiration to strike a balance on G20 as the model they want to actually address. This is liberal Brazilian Itamaraty kind of stuff. And this Itamaraty process was the one that actually brought the first BRICS crisis, as in the sense of all decisions must be unanimous on who's going to join or not. And it was Brazil among all the members that refused to. But the other reason here is that we're betting for a Kamala presidency. They have very good relationship with the Democrats. And they thought at some point, I believe they thought that was going to happen. And they were just, laying the groundwork in order to make it even smoother for them once a Democrat government would achieve the White House. And of course it backfired and they have to change course. And I think that's what we're seeing. And the way Brazil now doesn't care much about our internal affairs, for example, the last year elections and so forth, tells you about that. And also the offer from them to mediate And so, and I think, and they must be now far more aware of the dangers that we are standing on. Because once, let's say, of course it's not going to happen, but let's say Venezuela's out of the picture, what comes next?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly it's going to be Brazil. And once you got Brazil, the rest is just so easy regarding the rest
Yeah.
of, you know? And so they are aware of this. And they're not stupid people. They have done politics at some point, but they're not stupid. So we're seeing that this is going to also reshape this kind of dynamics. I don't know if at an unofficial level or more on a, undisclosed one, a private one, a closed one. We'll see. But but they both, Colombia and Brazil, are definitely at the crosshairs right now.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, we're over the hour, so I know that we don't want to run on too much, but that was really insightful, Diego. Thank you. Really appreciate it, and we'd love to get you back on again at some point to go deeper into the whole geopolitical picture from a Latin American perspective. Where can people catch up with you or find your work?
Well, the go-to place is misionverdad.com, MISIONVERDAD, Truth Mission in Spanish.com. I think that's not only my work, but the people who actually work here, which are the rest of the team. I'm the Mission Verdad bomb. I founded it, and then I just laid to rest and gave interviews. I'm just joking. And then the Telegram channel, I think it's pretty dynamic. I also invite everyone to follow it. And personally, just look Diego Sequera on Twitter, and the pictures, you know who I am there. So, yeah, those are the three main places, I think.
Well, I'll put them all in the show notes so people can follow you. And yeah, once again, thank you very much. Fee, anything else?
Yeah, well, Diego, thank you for your insight. Thank you for being there, and giving us, more of a different perspective that doesn't get heard. I definitely would like to talk to you more about, what's happened in Honduras, what's coming in Nicaragua. And yeah, I'm gonna
Central
be
America special, something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm heading towards South America soon, so it'll be I'll
Okay.
be much closer to all of that. So thanks.
Take care.
Anytime.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.